Good morning. Good morning. And welcome everyone. I'm glad to see you here. We're unusually chilly spring morning. So next week, David Brazier, also known as Dharma Vidya, will be speaking to us on the Genjo Koan, and we've started talking about it a little bit in preparation. I'd like to continue that discussion today. This work was very important to Zen Master Dogen, as he placed it as the first chapter in his Shobo Genzo, his compilation of writings. And he revised it right towards the end of his life. And we are left with the revised edition. And it's been subjected to many different translations and interpretations, endless. And we're continuing that tradition in our own way here. But it lends itself to many perspectives. So I don't think any of those interpretations are redundant. So last week, we were talking about the first section. Now, the first section of Dogen's works, his chapters, almost always contain the core message. So this first section is important, and we talked about most of it, but we left off without discussion of the last sentence. And so I'd like to focus on that today because to me, this last sentence is pivotal. It's really the most enigmatic and in some ways interesting sentence in the whole work. So I'd like to discuss it a little bit. So we talked last week about these first three sentences where we discuss that, there are distinctions we make between birth and death and delusion, realization, Buddhas and sentient beings, ordinary people. And in some manner, those distinctions are illusory. And the Buddha way is to be aware of all of this, to leap beyond it. In some ways, you could think about the first perspective as being on the ground, dealing with ordinary life, having to make distinctions. And of course, we have to do this. We have to distinguish food from non-food. There are so many important distinctions we have to make in order to just survive. But the second sentence sort of takes in the view from 30,000 feet, where all of those distinctions are blurred, and there's just one planet with teeming birth, death, and delusion realization, all happening at once. And then the Buddha way in the third sentence is, one way of looking at it is being able to navigate those two perspectives, or at least not be stuck in either one. To have a mind that flows freely, non-abiding. So those first three sentences we've discussed last time, but the last sentence almost seems like a non sequitur. I mean, we're talking about these lofty concepts and how to view them. And then all of a sudden we're talking about blossoms and weeds, very tangible, concrete things, blossoms and weeds. Yet in attachment, blossoms fall, and in aversion, weeds spread, is the translation that Tanahashi and Aiken give to this. Yet in attachment, blossoms fall, and in aversion, weeds spread. It sort of brings in the very human, emotional aspect that we enjoy blossoms, flower blossoms, and yet they're destined to wither and fall. And the very word weed indicates a dislike, even though it's just another plant. It disturbs our sense of order, and we have an aversion to it. So the last sentence brings in this emotive dimension and also starts off with this, I think, the key word, which is yet, which is translated in different ways. I'll move on to the translation of, if I can. The translation of David Brazier. So it is, and nevertheless, blossom falls bittersweet, and weeds spread amidst woeful resignation. The same sentence. Use the word nevertheless instead of yet. Pretty much the same meaning. You could also say, that being the case, we've heard about the Buddha way, but all the same, nevertheless, and yet. Kind of like, okay, I hear all that, but nevertheless. Blossom falls bittersweet, and weeds spread amidst woeful resignation. Moving along one more step, we could look at this interlinear translation that I referred to last time. Sort of an attempt to be as literal as possible with the translation. And it reads something like this. Nevertheless, thus, like, are, although, flower, love, pity, fall, grass, discard, dislike, grow, only be. So, although things are like this, nevertheless, flower, fall, and it's associated with love, pity, a sense of loss and longing, a sense of grief. And grass, in this sense, referring to weed or something that you don't want in the garden, it grows only be, and you dislike it and perhaps pull it, discard it, desire to get rid of it. I think this sentence is very telling. And it reminds us that yes, these Buddha's teachings, this way of practice, this way of being in the world, is helpful and provides a refuge, but nevertheless, there will be sorrow at times, there will be grief at times. There will be times that you want things to be different than the way they are and become distressed. You know, a simple version of Buddhism goes something like this. Life is difficult. It's associated with sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. It's associated with distress at association with those you don't want to be with, and grief at the loss of those you love. It's associated with not getting what you want. And the root cause of all that is thirst, desire, wanting things to be other than the way they are. So there's a solution to that. Just quench that desire, quash that thirst, and no longer want things to be other than the way they are, and then you're set. No sorrow, no lamentation, no pain, distress, or despair. You don't care who you're around or who's coming, who's going. And you no longer want anything, so it doesn't matter. But in fact, that's not compatible with life. It's not a viewpoint that is compatible with life. We always want things to be somewhat different than the way they are, or at least frequently we do. If we're hungry, we'd rather be not hungry. We'd rather fix dinner if we have the wherewithal to do so. We're constantly perceiving things to be other than the way we would perhaps like them and go about fixing them. If the house is untidy, at some point it reaches a threshold of dislike, and you go about cleaning the house. So So I was riding my bicycle back from Forest Park last weekend, and coming back through out of the city into University City, and then up Midland into Veneta Park on my way to Overland. And I, at that time, was using a medication that the dermatologist had advised for something on the side of my face. What she described as a pre-cancer in order to encourage me to use the medication. But she warned that, you should avoid sun when you're taking this. So I had a scarf on under my bicycle helmet. Probably looked a little strange, but riding along on the way back toward home and passing one of the side streets in Veneta Park, there were somebody was calling at me, and so I looked to see who was calling, and to perhaps wave or whatever. And it was 4 Black youth, probably late teens, early 20s, congregated there in the street, and it became clear they were taunting me. One of them said, "Look at the white sheik on a bike," and the others said various things that I didn't understand, and so I just kept riding, and but then noticing response to that. Of course, as an adult, we don't get taunted as regularly, so it's not a common experience. When we're kids, we deal with it quite a lot, but as an adult, you, at least in our circumstance, in my circumstance, I don't tend to get taunted regularly, and so it was a little different. So I was processing this. And yes, there was a little bit of fear because, taunting implies a sort of ill intent, and ill intent can go many ways. We're all aware of this, but not much fear because I was on the bike and could easily escape, so it wasn't a problem. But I think the dominant feeling was just disappointment. And just wanting things to be other than the way they are. Wanting to live in a world where no one taunts one another, or it just doesn't happen. And being disappointed that, no, I'm not in that, I'm not in that world. And of course, further considerations. Being Black males, they have, I'm sure, received messages through much of their life that they were unwelcome here. So they were perhaps turning those messages back on me, which is understandable. But yet there was still that feeling of disappointment. Sort of grief for a a world that doesn't really exist here. There's always this, it comes back to me, the after the Watts riot, and they were interviewing Rodney King, and he was a man of few words, but his most memorable thing that he said for me was, "Why can't we just get along? Why can't we just get along? Why can't we live in that world where no one taunts one another or takes advantage of one another, or on and on?" So I think the Buddha way is not, at least my view of it, is not a way to escape painful emotions, to escape all disappointment or grief or sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and at times despair. But without the Buddha way, those are experienced without refuge, without any place to go to rest. And the Buddha way offers refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. A place to carry those painful emotions when they arise and not be swept away with them, stuck in them, destroyed by them. So I'll come back to one quote that I've used before, and I hope I'm not overusing it and bending it completely out of shape, but it's something that struck me and I've carried with me. And even though it's not directly related to Buddhism, I think it carries the same message about our practice. You are not here to do exercises or to learn to do something right, but to be able to meet a stimulus that always puts you wrong and learn to deal with it. And that's by Frederick Alexander, the developer of the Alexander method that some of you in music or in acting may be familiar with. So I think I'll stop there. I would be interested. Carol is handing me a note. Okay. Okay. I think I'll stop there and just open it for discussion about the Buddha way, difficult emotions, wanting things to be other than the way they are. How do you interpret this last little sentence? And I think today we'll just talk as a group without breaking into smaller groups.